what I'm going to do is talk about the work in this year's Silent Disco. It's a mixed show. I was once asked how I chose the work. I don't. I choose the people, and I trust them to choose a piece of work that they think they would like to share with somebody or share with the audience. It's been going on now in one form or another for about 4 or 5 years. This is probably the largest one, and it's probably got the widest range and greatest diversity, a range of work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about all of the work. Sometimes I'll be talking about them in pairs because I've hung some pieces because there is a thematic connection, not because they look alike, quite the opposite in fact. It's the fact that they are different in appearance, but in terms of concept or theme, they actually share, they have common values and factors. And talking about values, this is basically a show of work that is sort of out of the mainstream, made by people who are not exactly household names, but I've been in this business for what, 50 something, a hell of a long time, all my life, and I think I have a particular take on the way I think about and talk about painting. I'm not going to, the work in this show isn't here because I like it, okay? Put that right out of your mind. Anyway, what I'm going to do is start off straight away by talking about a piece of work by a woman who was a student of mine at at City and Guilds Art School about 20 years ago. She came up to me, her name's Yukako Shibata, and she said, "Graham, I'd like to learn to carve." And I said, "Okay." And at City and Guilds, you must remember, there's the most amazing stone carving and wood carving school there, department. Anyway, off she went to the department, and I just left her to it. And a few weeks later, I said, "How did you get on?" She said, "Okay, I've done it. I did some carving." And I thought, well, first piece, you'd imagine that somebody, if they're going to learn to carve, would create something that if you took it home for your mum and dad, it'd end up as a doorstop, right? You know, if you managed to make something that looked like a kind of potato, you'd think it was a good day, a hell of an achievement. So I said to Yukako, "So what did you decide to carve?" And she said, "A sheet of paper." Now, it would never cross my mind, if I were learning to carve, or whatever, to carve a sheet of paper. Now, I'm going to have to be very careful about how I handle this piece, but here it is. It's called Curl, and it's 22, 23 years old. It's a piece of lime wood, and I remember seeing the block, and it was about, so big, and it's extraordinary. The very idea that one would want to learn to carve is great, that's terrific, but the first object you would carve, or the first subject, would be a piece of paper. I just thought, that's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, breathtaking. Adjacent to that is a piece by my wife, by Sally Crowley. I mean, it's a bowl, so it's one of those pieces that's self-evident, but what's important about this is Sally makes her own paper, it's all recycled, and I can pick this up. And there's something, I don't know about you, but there's something very satisfying about a bowl. And of course, it's got that deckled edge that's synonymous with handmade paper, particularly if you're familiar with prints. And I think there's small bits of plant material in there as well, which adds to that sort of slightly speckled sort of, that's it. I just think there's something terribly satisfying about the sphere or the hemisphere. Right, okay, now what I'd like to do is we'd like to move into the other part of the show, and talk about two other pieces, and these are linked. These are linked by the idea of mortality, okay? Right, I'm going to talk about this piece first. It's by a poet called Tamar Yoseloff. Tamar, she contributed a poem to a book I published recently called Dark Matter, and we met over that project. And then I later discovered that she'd been collaborating with lots of visual artists on projects that involved text and image, and that she would be a terrific candidate to have in this project. Very briefly, about 6 or 7 years ago, she was diagnosed with cancer. She's now recovered in full remission, and she was given a book by the NHS, and it's so what we did, what we have done, or what Tammy had done, was she decided to take 3 pages from that book and redact most of the text, right? Okay, so you end up with what really is something like a sort of 60s or 70s concrete, well, 50s and 60s concrete poem through here. I'm not going to read it out, except to say that when I did send this PDF off to be made into the giclée print that it is now, a person who made it phoned me back and said, "I'm afraid, Graham, it's corrupted, the PDF, because most of the words have been obliterated or redacted." Anyway, so that's her contribution. Next to Tammy's piece is a piece by Terry Bond. Now, Terry Bond, first of all, you've got to realise that if you know the history of Matisse, you'll know that when he was producing the designs for the chapel at Valoris in the south of France near Nice, he would draw on the wall with a very long stick. He was aided by his assistant who would make the paper cutouts, and he would quite often be in bed with a sort of shawl around his neck, Anyway, Terry has always been, what should we say, one of those people who's somewhere between situationist and conceptual artist. His work it's not driven by media, it's driven by concept, it's driven by ideas. And Terry here is in bed. He was diagnosed with a very aggressive, he had cancer of the spine, it was misdiagnosed anyway. And instead of drawing angels, Terry has got a stick and he's doing this bit of graffiti, this cock and balls sort of, generic graffiti on the wall. Sadly, he died a few weeks after this piece of work was completed. So there is, it's fairly intense. I mean, and the title of this piece is Facing the Inevitable, by the way. Right. I now want to talk about this. There's another pair over here, and they have been paired. This piece is a watercolour by Brian Biggs. Now, anybody who's familiar with Brian will know that he's been associated with the Blue Coat Gallery for more years than I can remember. In fact, it was one of my first shows. It was a 2-person show up there with Brian in the 70s at the Blue Coat Gallery. And he's been a friend and a familiar for years. He also organises things like the Beef Art Symposium in Liverpool, which is all over the place. I was invited to speak at it. Anyway, this is, Brian collects bricks, right? That's not a surprise. But what's delightful is the fact that this is called Equivalent. Now, I can't remember whether the Carl Andre piece that bears the same title from, 30 or 40 years ago, that caused a slight sort of issue with people like the guy who wrote in, is it Johnson? Paul Johnston, I think, who wrote for The Spectator and referred to these people doing minimalist work that was driven by sort of a particular sense of what was, the art of the real and phenomenology, etc. He called them brickies because he was trying to be disparaging and rather arch. Anyway, the idea that a piece that contentious from 40 years ago should actually have the title appropriated to a watercolour by somebody who collects bricks, I think is absolutely terrific. It's wonderful. It's a way that history sort of, comes back to bite itself, as it were. Now, that's one piece. Alongside is a piece by Karen Densham. Now, Karen is Terry's widow. They used to work together. They had a project called the Ron and Penny Jug Foundation. I can't go into any further, but it was one of those projects that was truly a situationist project. Okay, it took many characters. It was in many forms. Okay, I'm hesitating because I suddenly realised how complicated their projects are. But Karen is a ceramicist, and a very accomplished ceramicist, and some of her work is absolutely exquisite. I went to see a show of hers 2 or 3 years ago, and there were some remarkable pieces, solo show at the Asylum Studios here in Suffolk. And I enjoyed the show, but one of the pieces in the show, this piece, resonated and, what should I say, perplexed me more than any of the others, right? And I suddenly realised what it was. It's multi-layered, it's really complicated, and it involves the idea of those house names. Now, in the 60s, people would go on continental holidays and bring back these pieces of bark-edged, obliquely cut house names probably from the Black Forest in southern Germany, and incised in German Gothic or Old German lettering would be things like Chez nous or whatever. Okay, now so the pedigree of this object is in kind of the idea that domestic kitsch, effectively. Now, so this piece, it challenges any sense of pride, if you like, because if you look at it, it's pretty clearly that it's done. It has a lumpen sort of quality. The green is a kind of a dull, turgid green. The tent is a sort of textbook sort of Baden-Powell ridge tent from the sort of Boer War, that pattern. And then, of course, it has the number 8 on it. Now, the title, by the way, of this piece is NFA, which stands for No Fixed Address. And so I find it's absolutely delightful because it's so multi-layered that it stayed with me for ages, and I thought I have got to have this piece in an exhibition sometime in the Silent Disco project, because everybody who saw it at the time said, "Oh yeah, I remember that piece. It's really complicated. It left me wondering what the hell was going on." And I thought, yeah, job done. Okay. Now, another pairing, and this is Alexandra Bloom, who I think it's called Sleeping Tree, and this is a piece by David McIntosh. Now, Alexandra's drawing is absolutely exquisite, and I've got to put my glasses on because at every point you think you've just about taken in what's going on and something else. Everything is kind of, the idea of the edge isn't available. Things are coming and going, and everything feels provisional. You know, branches don't necessarily go all the way out. They're piecemeal. Everything is broken and partial. And then suddenly, in these negative spaces, everything is inhabited by, I don't know, cat, dog, fox, whatever it is, or bird or pigeon. And then suddenly, the rude awakening, there is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different, or 4 or 5 different helicopters overhead. So I find it's absolutely visually delightful. It's a terrific piece, right? But it also demands a great deal of attention when looking at it, and a hell of a lot more when making it. So, you know, the kind of what is it? The kind of convenient tag these days is mindfulness, right? Okay, so bear that in mind. Now, this piece by David is the other side of the coin, right? This is immediate. It's if it took more than an hour, like half an hour, whatever, and it's immediate and sort of very direct. And this is where it becomes quite. It's the other side of the coin, shall we say. The title of this piece, and I've got to be very careful how I pronounce it because it's wonderfully important. It's what drives the piece, in fact, is mindless fullness, right? Mindless fullness. Now, it's important that it's not mindlessness, right, or mindfulness, but mindless fullness. And the way that sits culturally between the idea of mindlessness, which proliferates, and mindfulness, which is obviously a desired state of affairs, particularly when making things or doing, you know, work generally or being. This, I think, is a terrific kind of riff on that. Okay, mindless fullness. Right, okay, what I'm going to do now is talk about another pairing, and not all of the show is about pairs. Some of the pieces stand alone, as it were, or don't seem to speak to other pieces in such a direct way. These are not portraits, right? They're paintings of heads, right? This one is by Sam Jackson, and it's called Getting Closer. This is by Roland Thomas, and it's Naiad, N-A-I-A-D, which I think is a wood spirit or a spirit of the forest, right? Also refers to an opera. Roland works at Opera North, so he's, yeah, anyway, so it's a reference to that. But the thing that I find fascinating about these two is that in a certain sense, I can't actually gender them. They seem androgynous. What one's met with is a stare. It's kind of eye contact. Not that they follow you around the room in the kind of sort of, you know, rather sort of jokey way that Hancock would have dealt with it, or Galton and Simpson would have dealt with it. There's something fixed, not only about this piece, but that piece, right? And wherever you look, there's a certain amount of, a degree of, it's not hesitancy, it's kind of a bit like the act of painting these projections of other selves or self are, what should I say, finely balanced between definition and some kind of abstraction, some kind of paint being itself, as it were, okay? Right. This is by Juan Bolivar, and it's called Hail, H-A-I-L, Hail, and Juan's work is, well, he's made it his own. This is, that there, when you see this piece of work, you realise how precise and how impeccably made this is. Right, it's, if you haven't already sussed it out, it's Pepe Le Pew meets Joseph Albers. Pepe Le Pew being a character from Looney Tunes, Warner Brothers Looney Tunes, just after the Second World War. And the curious thing was that these things were running contemporaneous historically, right? And here they are fused together for the first time, literally in one place. Now I'd like to talk about this painting. It's by Jackie Berridge, and it's called Lost 2, and the 2 is spelled T-O-O, lost as in also lost. Right, it really is, it demands, rather like Alexandra Bloom's piece, it demands close scrutiny, because this, again, is exquisite, and like the 2 portraits I was talking about earlier, the 2 heads that I was talking about earlier on, it has a meditative quality. It's very, Jackie's very absorbed in what she's doing, and that's self-evident. But not so self-serious as to actually, when it comes to sort of putting a figure in the ground, whether that's an eye or not, I'm not sure. And that reminds me of not Rackham or Herbert Crowley, actually, the Anglo-American, but the Wade ornament. Here is a little lamb, you know, the idea of the lost lamb, the lost sheep, and it's just 2 or 3 little highlights and give it that sort of slightly ceramic gloss. Everything else is very, very matte and very light absorbent. No, it's one of those pictures that fascinates endlessly. You're rewarded by looking, basically. It's terrific. Right. And now another piece, even smaller. In fact, they're going to get smaller for a while, much smaller. This is a piece, a painting called After Peter, and Peter is spelled P-I-E-T-E-R. And the Peter in question is Peter de Hoogh, 17th century Dutch painter of genre interiors, contemporary of Vermeer and Rembrandt. And it's by Anne Makalani. And the thing that I really enjoy about this, apart from the fact that it's, I think, the colour space, it's self-evident, it's something that you can, what should I say, imaginatively take a stroll through, right? Even though it's the size of a postcard. But also, it has this wonderful surface that at very close quarters, it looks sort of like small pieces of felt that have been cut and sort of like marquetry and sort of fitted in around each other. There's something very, very focused and very studied about Anne's work, and this piece particularly. Anyway, right, now just getting even smaller. This is a piece by Henry Miller. Now, I met Henry because he had a piece up at the last year's John Moore's at the Walker Art Gallery. And yeah, this is, I don't know whether you can see, it's actually painted on a matchbox. It's one of those larger Cook's type matchboxes. Cook's as in kitchen cooks, right? And it's a, again, it's a picture of, not a portrait of Morton Harket. I think it's Morton Harket. Yeah, Morton Harket, yeah. Now, Morton Harket, for those of you who don't know, is the lead singer of a-ha, with, which became very big. Was it in the 80s? Probably. Anyway, but the thing that I really enjoy about Henry's work is that this is a watercolour on a matchbox, right? Now, don't ask me why anybody would paint on a matchbox, but Henry's work, when you look closely at it, it always seems to be at the edge of breaking down, where the paint seems to be reacting in the strangest way, yeah? So he's using the paint, he's working with the paint, rather than, in fact, I'd say 75% of that is the effect of the way the paint wants to behave, rather than the way that Henry would like it to behave, okay? Right. Now I've hung these two together, and what I'm first going to do is talk about Maggie James' piece. Now this, that's it, right. This is, as I say, by Maggie James. It's called River and Scots Pine, and painted a couple of years ago. The thing that I love about this, I mean, I don't think there's anybody I know who doesn't enjoy the work of Whistler and the spareness, the kind of sheer intellectual elan, the elegance of it. But here, there's something about the precision, again, it's about precision of mind, that drives the very spare, very reduced, very minimal sort of paint handling. Now, whether it's now this is why it's twinned with Hester Finch's piece, which is called, and I'm going to read this. I just thought we were on the same page. I'll come to that in a minute. So that's Maggie's piece. But what is happening now? I'm not sure if this is a reflection. It doesn't really matter. But it has the kind of idea that somehow light has intruded into the composition, but it's not quite clear from where it has come, because that's clearly a fairly minimal landscape. That is ostensibly the river, presumably, at the top part, and this is the Scots pine. Right, here, this is, sorry, I'm just going to describe the medium. It's gesso on cotton bed sheet, right, and this is a lot of people who've seen, several people who've seen this keep going, oh, I had a duvet like that, right? Which is probably part of the point. Now, this piece, right, it's obviously, she's masked it and then painted with gesso over the imagery in a semi-transparent sort of way, in a sort of fairly haptic sort of way. But once the tape was taken off, it looks like, not so much like the sort of lights from a computer screen, but the shadow falling on a wall with this Disney-type wallpaper or a bedspread. This is, when you look at this, you suddenly see the window frame, metaphorically, right, that's cast onto this white, this surface. So this actually becomes the illuminated surface, and this is the surface in shadow. I think there's something really offbeat, really kind of, it's not an easy piece, but it's not meant to be. And again, rather like Karen Densham's NFA, it's one of those that you think, this is really engaging and it's really demanding. Okay, right, now another piece here. This is This is it's a piece by a guy called Martin Batty, and I think it's untitled. I'm pretty sure it is. Yep, right. It's. I don't think anybody would win prizes for realising that rectangular piece of cardboard with corners like that is anything other than a beer mat, right? Now, when Martin gave me these to put in the show, I was struggling with the idea of putting them in lines, in a grid, and then suddenly I thought, what happens if you get the sense that they were just scattered, just sort of thrown at the wall and by some miracle stuck to the wall? Because the chance, the composition between each of them and internally is I think, when they're seen together and when they work like this, you suddenly think, ah, yes, something else is happening, something outside or beyond the work, okay? So, and that took quite a while before Sam, who helped me install the show, that was finally what we decided to do, was to try and animate this collection of beer mats, which is 12, 14 of them, and rather than sort of line them up, yes, and regiment them in some predictable fashion. Okay. A lot of the work is because of the logistics, the cost, and the whole business of mailing it back and forth, and also fitting it in so it doesn't look too cramped, or look like something crowded, like the summer show or something. This is a piece by Gary Colclough, and it's untitled. Oh, that's two in a row. Right, it's ostensibly a little study of a piece of flint or rock, okay? I mean, that's not going to come as a surprise. But what I particularly enjoy about this piece is the way that it suddenly dissolves and disappears and then appears. It's made manifest simply by the light, okay? It's a painting, and it's something that I think about a lot in my painting, or as a painter, the idea of light. And shadow. But it's a really, again, rewarding. And then there's this sense of sort of, you're not simply stuck on seeing a piece of rock. There's a lot to enjoy. It's like the sort of idea of landscape or some microcosm, yeah. Anyway, that's Gary's piece. Right. This is a piece by Stephanie Dewey. It's called, hold on, I've got to get this right. A Split. Right. Now, whether that's the play, I don't know, but this is based on whether it's a portrait or whether it is a bust, but it's ostensibly the Emperor Diocletian, okay? Now, I'm not in a position to discourse on Diocletian. All I know is one of his greatest claim to fame was the fact that he was emperor in the 3rd century AD, I think, during the crisis of one of many crises of the Roman Empire, but he was the only emperor to ever decide to retire rather than be murdered or usurped in some brutal fashion. But it's just, if somebody said to you, what are you doing at present? And you say, well, I'm doing a painting of Diocletian. It's not every day you hear something like that, is it? And you think, no, good for you, Stephanie. Yeah. Right, this is a piece by a guy who I've known Lawrence. It's Lawrence Wood, and I'm just going to get the title right because it's fairly lengthy. Here we are. Right, okay, this is by a guy called Lawrence Wood, and it's one-man cigar band magic. And I will actually have to read the media. Acrylic, well, that's pretty self-evident. Cigar bands. Now, they're the things that go around a cigar, I believe, yes, that people that sort of distinguish them. And I think we've got several of them there, so it's a collage of those. Cigar bands. Metal foil, metal powder and varnish on incised cardboard. Well, it's all there. The one thing that's curious is the rather sort of ominous character with the automatic rifle over his shoulder and the combat trousers just tends to sort of lift it from sort of the general kind of, I don't know, there's something about this piece that it's still, as I say, like so many of the pieces in the show, it perplexes me and fascinates me. And I find it rewarding to look at. One of the immediate details is the fact that these incisions, which is I think what he's referring to, end in spikes. So there's like a cage, the idea of prison, etc. It's a hell of a mix-up, a hell of a mash-up, but absolutely fascinating. Right. Right, next picture is this terrific little oil painting by Curator, who lives in southeast in Ireland, somewhere near Wexford. I think it's Enniscorthy, or anyway, near Wexford. But she first came to my attention. I'd just read a book called Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. It's a couple of years ago now, maybe more, and which had a cover, a Bruegel cover. There's another follow-up, and they're short novels, novella, and the one after that, I can't remember the title of that, but it had a terrific painting on the cover. I looked it up, and I got in touch with her, and again, what's absolutely delightful about this painting is that the light, if you look closely, it's almost liquid. The paint and the light are synonymous. They're liquid. They seem to sort of meld together. Yeah. No, it's a terrific little painting. Right. Right. Talking of small paintings, this is Woodland by Rosie Prince. Rosie's name is Prince, P-R-I-N-C-E, but her email address is P-R-I-N-T-S. And it wasn't until I looked it up I suddenly thought, sure. Anyway, this is by Rosie Prince. It's called Woodland, and I put in mind, there's something, I mean, I saw Rosie's work at the last Contemporary British Painters competition late last year in 23, and she paints rather dystopian landscapes, you know, laments for the kind of the degradation of the natural environment. As do a lot of other people, but the thing that really excites me about Rosie's work is that she invests that anxiety in the work, in the way that she makes it, is that there is something unruly, unkept and desultory about the way she actually paints. There's something kind of, it's a sense of lament and a sense of loss. The other thing, of course, is it puts me in mind of those late Nashes like Totus Mare. Okay? But, right, okay, now, these are both landscapes. This one is by a guy called David Wiseman, and it's Dartmoor River. I've known this guy, David, for most of my life, adult life. We were at art school together in the 60s, and the thing that I love about David's work is the fact that he's not afraid of enjoying and celebrating the very experience, not just of looking at the landscape, but reflecting it in the painting. There is something, they're absolutely joyful, and there's this terrible kind of tendency to see things that are celebratory as, you know, as if they were somehow less significant than something rather sober or sort of dour. Talking of dour, this is a piece by Matilda Bevan, and I think it's called Root. Yes. Now I'm just going to read the description because it's pretty self-evident. Oil on found acrylic painting, dated 1986. Right. Now, if you look carefully, there's a fairly monochromatic overpainting that is done in this kind of purple cerise sort of colour, right, over what is a very, very ordinary and generic, landscape. The thing that excites me is the counterpoint between the two, the idea that this is recycled, reclaimed, and repurposed, but in such a way that the kind of the two different models, or if you like, approaches to landscape painting, are in absolute conflict all the time. Again, a piece that sort of it's not about whether you like it or not. It's whether you enjoy or you can sense that conflict and you appreciate the tension that brings to the object. Right. Now this is a painting by Joanna Whittle. Yes, and this has the title, Are You There? Right. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the work of Joanna Whittle. Jo won the Contemporary British Painters Prize in 2019, and this is probably about as large as her work gets. She recently had a pop-up show with Charlie Smith, London, in I can't remember, it was somewhere in Soho anyway. Right. There's something, the thing that really I think excites me about Jo's work is the intensity and above all the luminosity. Some of her pieces, and a lot of people who have come to her work realise that lots of them seem to have a small light inside. They're actually luminous. They're like little power packs. Jo was actually a student when I was professor at the Royal College of Art. She was one of the first people I spoke to in 1998. And her work has always had this wonderful sort of, luminosity. There's no other word for it. I think they're compelling. They're mysterious, but not in a kind of gratuitous or meretricious sort of way. They're simple, modest, what look like temporary structures, big tops, marquees and things like that, where it's not really specified what's happening or what has happened. When she was shortlisted in 2019 up in, I think it was Harrogate at the museum, anyway, for the 2019 shortlist, I think it's Guy Scanlon said to me, the man who was the curator of the show, that they were just unloading lots of lorries and getting ready to install the show of all the shortlisted painters' work, and a woman turned up with a carrier bag, a Tesco's carrier bag, and he was just about to walk off with her and go and get the stuff out of the van, and she had said, no, it's here. And he just turned to her and said, oh, thank God for that. And you can't blame him. Now, right, two more pieces here that do actually have, there is some correspondence. This is by Julian Perry, and it's Eastern Woods, which is, a matter of fact. Again, it's a very interesting link between all of these pieces, but this piece, this lovely sort of exquisite, broken, it's just it's the edge of a cliff. It's about erosion, I think, because a lot of Julian's work is concerned with East Anglian, erosion, of the coastal erosion. And if you look carefully, there is this wonderful spilling of light, and again, there's a sense of internal light, a luminosity. It's not achieved by putting white in the paint, okay? It's achieved by allowing the ground to breathe, to assert itself through the paint, rather like a watercolour, using the ground as the light. And now this little painting by Emma Todd called Ring, again, seems to be generating its own light, and after a while you start to pick up on it. And there is, in fact, if you can't already see it, a glow here, and the whole surface seems to be sort of slightly pulsating and seething. Again, a little painting that seems to be generating its own light. Terrific. Right. These two paintings hung together. The one on the left, the green one, is called Bending Hectic by Claire Kansick. And after a while you think, is it a landscape? No, it's not. It's probably a seascape, because here, in the left, centre left, is something rather like a shadow, the shadow of the figure, maybe the shadow of Claire Kansick. And there's something really just, the idea that it's at the edge of figuration and that figuration should be so familiar that makes it remarkable. Now, adjacent to that is a painting called Journey by Tinsel Edwards. I've known Tinsel for quite a while actually. Now, for the last few years, Tinsel has been painting paintings about parenting, and they're imbued, whether it's deliberately or not, with a sense of unease, a sense of anxiety, and sometimes faint celebration perhaps. But this one I find really not disturbing exactly, but perplexing, in the sense that it's not clear whether it's three figures, whether it's something kind of almost fetal. It really is, and the way it is painted in that kind of, there's a forbidding about the way it's painted. There is a, I find it difficult to describe, but it's not done in a desultory sort of way. There is something kind of powerful and broken and reticent about the language that I think is truly disturbing, much more so than the rhetoric of expressionist artists, which is just that, rhetoric. That this is something else, and I think it's very powerful. And again, quite unpleasant in some respects. Right, actually, right, might as well deal with this, get it over and done with now. This is a painting of mine from a couple of years ago, painted at the same time as Light Industry, which was the painting with which I won the John Moores Painting Prize last year. It's the workshop, it's Andy Tiernan's workshop. It's a classic motorcycle dealers in Framlingham, a few miles away. But what's really important for me about this is that it lies right between, on the cusp, which is why I've written about Manet and you know, inspired, if that's the word, by Manet, excited by Manet, when you get that wonderful duality between the object and the thing that it depicts. So there's the idea of image, subject matter, and then there's the painting as its own object, and you get this alternating current almost. And you know, things that are self-evidently brushed. Somebody said to me, what's that under the shelf? And I said, I don't know, it's just dark. And I mean, at the end of the day, I paint shadows. I'm not interested in the objects or their functionality or their description, but what I really am fascinated by is the idea of the fall of light, which is exemplified by the shadows in that shelf unit. Anyway, that's that one. But I've twinned that with Fleur Patrick's piece, which is called, and I'm just going to read it again, Watch It Scatter to the Winds. And that's a really very apt title. And also what's important is the medium here. It's oil and graphite on panel. So I think if you look closely, you can see the drawing. It's an architectural space, whether it's an atrium or what have you, right? And there seem to be, somebody said it looks more like a sort of greenhouse, but that's probably because of the paint handling. And there's something, again, I think that's hung with my piece, because there's that duality at work between the object, the actual, the role of the paint, the joy of the paint, and the idea that somewhere buried in there is the object. There's a third thing at work here, and that's this extremely kind of dominant sort of grain of the laminate, which is ply. I think that this is one of those paintings that really rewards being looked at. And that's something about just about all of the work in the show, it's about looking at the work. And now, the next piece, this could only be a painting. This is by Mime Thompson, and I think it's called Companion. Yes, Companion. It's very difficult to talk about this piece of work and avoid using the word owl, but let's just say that's out there already. The thing that Mime was in the Moors last year and Contemporary, in several shows, with this extraordinary way of animating the paint in this very immediate alla prima sort of way, by pushing and pulling and finding the image in the paint, right? Not imposing it and then colouring it in or fettling it, just turning and pulling. I mean, it's pretty self-evident that when you look at this piece of what is ostensibly the chest of the owl, that's where the marks start and that's where they end. That's where they start and that's where they end. And so on. It's just, it's disarming is the word for that piece. Right. Now, this is by Jane Ward, and it's, got to get this right, Along the Way. Now, Jane's work is essentially, it has been in the past, computer generated. Now this is, I'm just going to get the, mixed media on canvas. And it is, I mean, I don't think Jane would mind me touching it. There's little bits of white impasto that look like kind of, have like barnacles on rock, okay? They're little sort of, they're textures. But what starts, I think, as a highly kind of complex piece of digital image management is then, what should I say, finally revised and then painted and modified as his canvas. And then very occasionally you just get these extraordinarily, precise pieces of modernist architecture or, sort of Adriatic coastline or edge of Lake Garda type sort of towns and hotel complexes. Are just endlessly fascinating. Again, another piece of work that it rewards being looked at, and that I think is at the centre of what we're trying to do here. Just make people look at things, because I don't care whether people like or dislike stuff. I mean, somebody asked me whether I like my own work, and quite frankly, I don't think about it like that. It doesn't matter what I make of it like that. It's rather like the piece by Karen Densham, NFA. I'm not sure I like it in any sense of the word, but I'm fascinated by it. And that's what I really want people to take away from this project.